My name is Frode, as Mike just said. I come from Norway. I work at Telenor, which is sort of the belle of Norway. I've been there for 3 years, and I am helping build a global CERT SOC service for Telenor in Asia, Central Europe, and the Nordics. And before that, I did 7 years at the national CERT, basically hunting APT. And I used to be a techie once when I was young and beautiful. I promise, I was young and beautiful. I'm not really that anymore. And I'm not a developer, even though I come from a developer background. So I cannot do stuff like assembly line, and I'm not going to be the cool guy, I reverse this cool malware. What I do most of my time is to think about how we should work to become more effective. And that's what this talk is about. This is a bunch of models that I think is useful for an incident response team when you want to try to become more effective at combating advanced threats. And taking the red pill of attacker eviction, that's the sexy title. But this is the boring title. How to structure your thinking when countering espionage and sabotage from APT. So that's a little too long to have as my title, but that's what this talk is about. And we're going to look specifically at sort of how you are going to attempt to evict mission-driven, and well-organized adversaries, which of course translates into your own CSE, welcome, the NSA, the Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, the Iranians, the nation states and contractors of the world that is tasked with getting into your networks and do stuff that you don't want them to do there. So we're talking incident response, right? And this is can you see this? Yeah, I think it should be pretty clear. So this, by the way, this is how my slides are going to look. I cannot be bothered spending 3 months making, cool word art or graphics in PowerPoint. So I just draw them and I import the pictures. Hope you're okay with that. So this is a simplified incident, right? You're breached, then you detect it, you analyze it for a while, and then you try to kick the attacker out, and everyone is happy. And of course, it's not even remotely as simple as that. And you're not supposed to read all this. It's just there to tell you, no, it's more complicated. Because there's a whole lot of planning going into an operation that ends up being an APT attack in your infrastructure. But at some point, you're breached. And then you don't know anything for, I don't know, weeks, months, years sometimes. And then you discover, and that's what a lot of people call dwell time, between compromise and you detecting it. And then you follow all kinds of best practices, and you don't do anything until you've analyzed and scoped the incident. And then you think, oh, I'm really clever, and I'm going to kick them out. But somewhere in the middle of that, one of your analysts uploaded a sampled virus total, and the attackers got wind of that you know about it. So they spend the rest of the time planning how to resist your eviction, right? And then you think, OK, I'm good to kick them out. And you try, and you think, oh, now the attackers lost access, but did you succeed? Did you really kick them out? And what about when they try to re-enter? The point is, there is a lot of uncertainty here. When dealing with quote-unquote APT, advanced attacks, targeted attacks, whatever you want to call it, when you're responding to that, there's just a lot of uncertainty. It's actually surprisingly hard to know whether or not you're ready to try to kick out such an attacker. And I guess this is... OK, let's go back. This is sort of the problem statement of this talk, in a way. Or the problem that these models I'm going to present is going to try to help you tackle. That is to deal with this uncertainty, to have a better foundation to make good judgments. All of you, of course, know Department of Homeland Security. I'm sure a lot of you, especially your CSE guys, even know Chris Butera personally. They have an excellent presentation out about best practices and common missteps when you're dealing with, well, they call it major incidents. The point is that within the missteps section, there is a lot about not acting too soon. Like, be careful before you act, because you don't want to tip off your attacker until you are ready to, effectively kick them out. So unlike with, for instance, arterial bleeding, which there is no too soon when you're trying to stopping a bleeding, when it comes to countering APT, there is actually a too soon, right? But how do you know when the right time is? This comes back to the uncertainty, and yeah, you want to try to reduce the uncertainty before you act. Not because it's like, whether it's the too soon thing or something else, you want to make sure that you don't have too much uncertainty when you decide to act. And that means you have to understand the attacker. You need to understand what's going on in your infrastructure, right? So we'll start off by looking at some, I call it APT patterns. So coming from a developer background at least, it's like everything is patterns, So let's look at some APT patterns to better understand what's going on. And of course, I was telling a friend about this before, and she was going, half the room is going to be CSE, right? You don't have to tell them about APT, but so bear with me. And if you think I'm wrong, let me know. But yeah, let's start off. So the first pattern of sorts is that when it comes to intrusions into your network, I tend to think of them as one of two. Either it's a sting operation, sometimes called smash and grab. You just go in, very targeted, you steal something, and you're out. And the other one is where you sort of go in and you actually infiltrate the infrastructure with the intention of staying there for a while. And the reason I have like 4 examples up here is because you can have like a really simple smash and grab where you sort of you fish a specific person, you get onto that person's computer, and you expect to find some emails and some documents on his or her user profile. And then you grab that and you're done. And the other one is like you go in and you sort of spread out a little bit, but you have a very specific goal where you're there, and once you get it, you go out. As opposed to if you're gonna go sort of a persistent infiltration, but then again you have like the small footprint persistent infiltration, and you have the kind where you hear about sometimes full compromise, like everything is compromised. So that's how I think of intrusion patterns when it comes to targeted attacks. And this, I guess, is something that I don't need to explain to you guys, but it's here anyway. Like this is the typical quote-unquote APT operation. They have some foothold in your infrastructure here with 3 compromised nodes talking to a C2. And that's going to be the bridgehead that they're going to use most of the time. So if you detect these guys here, you're going to see that most of the work they're doing through these 3 bridgeheads. But if you find this command and control channel, you find these 3 clients, and you go, oh wow, I got APT. Ooh, got to clean this up fast. And you clean this up, and then you dodge that bullet. You sort of missed the point, right? Because these kinds of operations, they're going to have 1 or 2, small backup clusters of compromised clients with different malware, different C2s, different IPs. They're going to have a web shell on a web server somewhere to get back in if you kick them out. They have probably, if you don't have 2-factor authentication, they will have harvested some VPN credentials to get back in through your VPN. And something really cool that we've seen is installing what's on Windows Exchange is called a transport agent, which is where you can create a DLL that you can use it to filter email. Right? So spam filters, for instance, will be implemented as a transport agent. So these guys, they had made a transport agent that would just look for some magic header. And if that magic header appeared in an email, they would read the body of the email and execute the code that was in there. Right? So even if we did all the other things and we left that one out, they still had code execution opportunities in our infrastructure. So on to the next one. And this is actually, I realized actually last night that this slide alone should probably be its own presentation. But this is something that, at least for me, over the last couple of years, has sort of been like a aha moment. And that is, when you're looking at these kinds of intrusions, you need to realize that there are several layers of them. And there is the access layer. And I learned recently that CSE's C&E group is called the same as NSA's, TAO, which is kind of funny because this picture here they basically took their way of operating and they made it their name. Because the A is tailored access operations, right? And yeah, the A, that's access. There you go, access layer. That's when they penetrate your infrastructure and they get a foothold and they sort of maintain persistency and backup ways in and everything. And then it's sort of the business layer. That is the tailored part. I mean, they're in there to get access to something, right? So they have tailored their access so that they can get access to database A, B, and C. And I work at a telco, and turns out the big intelligence agencies are really interested in what, in the public debate with NSA in the US is called communication metadata. But basically, who called who when, for how long, and from where. So part of the tailoring on the access layer will be to make it easy to extract that kind of information from us as a telco, right? And then it's I call it the mission layer, but I should have called it the operations layer because then it would have actually been TAO operation, because that's like, what are you doing? You cannot observe this directly. You have to sort of deduce what that is, but when you analyze, so let's skip ahead here. So again, don't try to read this. I'll put the slide deck online. This is for your reviewing afterwards. But what's important to understand, you need to make sure that you are able to distinguish between what is basically what I've started calling evil sysadmin. It's just the attackers sysadmining their access, you know? So a lot of the activity that you will actually observe when you are analyzing an APT intrusion is just going to be sysadmin of the access that they have. Based on sort of land of origin and sort of how their playbooks look, they will come in the morning just to make sure everything is up, ping all the systems they're supposed to have access to, you know, try to query a database just to see that they still can sort of query it. And say, okay, it's good. And then they don't do anything for the rest of the day maybe. Until sometimes they come back in and, oh, I've gotten a task. I'm going to extract this data. And then they go in and they just query and they extract the data. So you need to distinguish these two types of activities. Because when you're going to plan your response, it isn't so on the technical side, it's important, of course, to have full, when people say scope during an incident like this, basically what they often mean is scoping the access layer, right? The compromised assets and identities. But I think we should focus a lot more on figuring out not just what the access looks like, but what are they actually going after? Like, try to identify, as it says down to the right there, which you probably cannot see, like, try to identify the attacker's critical pathways to their mission-critical data, which in the green thing is, the green layer there is the databases, right? Try to identify why they built this access, you know? And at least make sure that whatever you do, you try to secure those, because that's what they're after. Who cares which laptops and servers they're on? It's the data sources that you need to protect first and foremost. So let's move on. As I said, this could probably be its own presentation, so we don't have time for that. Okay, so why are you being attacked in the first place? That is also something that can, I don't know, baffle people. Having worked with this kind of incident response for almost a decade, I've had a lot of conversation with people who just, well, why? Why are they attacking me? I don't get it. I don't have anything interesting, which of course is never true. And what where I always circle back to is that if you're being hit by targeted attacks like this, there exists an adversarial relationship somewhere that you are relevant to. That is the only reason you're seeing capabilities like this deployed against you. If there is no adversarial relationship between two parties or more somewhere, you don't see this. You don't get this in your network if that doesn't exist. And we tend in the security community to we say, oh, you have an adversary problem, and then basically what people are talking about is the C&E teams, you know, the TAOs of the world. They mean like the on-keyboard operators doing the collection. But of course, that's not your adversary, at least not the one that has an adversarial relationship with you. The adversary is someone else. Like for, since we're in Canada, I guess Nortel is a good example, right? It wasn't 3PLA that was Nortel's adversary. It was, I'm just going to go out and say it, Huawei, right? And they pillaged Nortel for, what, a decade? And if you thought that the 3PLA guys was if that was 3PLA, but it was at least the Chinese, was the adversary, you sort of missed the point, right? Because the adversary was actually one of the competitors who benefited from this. So this, I think, so a lot of people, of course, all you guys who work in the intelligence community, you get this. But a surprising amount of people working in the security industry doesn't really get this. And of course, if you go to your managers in IT operations, they absolutely do not have this perspective. And I think this is a perspective that is important to bring in during incident response. And yeah, sometimes this is you, sometimes it's actually you who have the adversarial relationship that is relevant for this attack on you. But other times you're just, not a random, but other times you are targeted because you can give access to the final target. And again, coming from a telco, the reason that all the major intelligence services of the world are super interested in telcos isn't because they really want to target us, but because we give them access to something that they really, really like. Who calls who, positioning data on people. Yeah, so as a telco, for the really, really targeted, or really sort of the scary threats out there, like the really capable organizations attacking us, this is the case. They're not really after us, but they're after our customers. And being able to distinguish this during incident response, are you a direct target or are you sort of an indirect target, is also important for how you think when you plan your response. Like, what is the best way to respond? So, and okay, I'm sorry, very crowded or unclear slide, but let me try to explain it as best I can. So you see the intelligence agency up there in yellow, and you have the C&E attack group, you know, the attack team or whatever you want to call it, some kind of project operation in TAO, right? Running an ops against, let's say, Telenor. A lot of the time when we respond to this, we are only sort of responding to basically the access layer, right? We are responding to compromised assets in IT. That's what we respond to. Only the most mature of companies, and I haven't, to be honest, met a lot of companies who really are doing this, responds to what is actually the biggest risk here, and that is the business side of things. So at least for, let's use corporate espionage as an example, like, and Nortel, right? It's Nortel's competitor that is the big issue here, right? It's the impact on business that is the big issue. It's not the compromised assets. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I think that most incident response teams of the world are just doing the sort of the response to the access layer. You know, the attack on IT operations and not the other side. And I think that should change if we want to be more effective at countering the risks that these threats pose to us. Okay, so that was the APT patterns. Anyone fall asleep? No, not yet. Not too much curry then. So we're going to have a very short intermission, sort of no more slides with diagrams on them for a little while. Just going to make some, I'm going to assert something here. Because now we've been talking about APT intrusions and sort of started talking about how to respond to it. And a lot of the time when we talk about this in the security community, we're talking about kicking them out, them as the attacker, kicking them out. And I think we need to start talking about keeping them out, right? And this, I actually believe that this is an important mindset change that needs to happen. That because kicking something out, that is like, oh, there's a leaky pipe on my kitchen, I'm going to wipe the floor. That is kicking out, right? The keeping out is, oh wait, I have a leaky plumbing thing here. Let's fix that, and then we're going to clean the floor. But once I clean it, they're not going to come right back. It's not going to start leaking again immediately, right? So I think we need a mindset change where we are saying we're going to keep them out. How are we going to keep these guys out? So that you do all the things you need to keep them out, and then you kick them out. Instead of just identify, oh, it's there and there and there and there, kick, and you haven't done anything to resist re-entry. And this actually goes back to this kind of cluttered IT ops versus business response. Because the first one, sort of just responding to the access into your network and helping IT ops clean up the network. I hope we at some point can say that was the old way that we did incident response, and that we are, and everyone is talking about mitigating risk, but I haven't really seen a lot of companies actually do it. It's easy to talk about, but bringing in business and trying to figure out what the business risk actually is from these incidents, I don't know, but we need to. So we should keep talking about it, but we should also try to figure out a way how to actually do it. Oops. Sorry. And then all this talking about cleaning up, I think, misses a very important point when it comes to incident response in these situations. And that is that sometimes letting them operate might be the best way to mitigate the big risks you're facing. And I've talked about this with a lot of incident responders, and way more than half goes like, are you crazy? We would never be allowed to do that. How could you be allowed to do that? This is insane. And maybe it is. But sometimes if you want to counter the business risk, you cannot act immediately on the IT operations risk. Because if you do that, if you act immediately on the IT operations side, the access side of things, you're not even going to come close to figure out the other stuff. So when I hear people say that, yeah, let it run for a while, most of the time it's because we need to scope the access layer, the blue layer, the IT ops side of things, so that we can identify everything that is compromised, so that when we clean up everything. A lot more seldom do I hear people say, let it run for a while so we figure out what they're doing. Because most of the time when people start exfiltrating sensitive data, it's like, stop! But if you don't let that happen, you're not going to be able to figure out what the business risk is. But I see why this is scary. My position on this is that it doesn't matter if you let them keep at it for a while or not, because even if you kick them out, they're going to be back in, and there's going to be a new dwell time. So, and during that time, they're going to do this anyway. So you might as well just let them do it while you're looking at it, because then you can figure out what the big thing is and maybe actually change something on the tactical or strategic level that will mitigate the bigger risk. So be bold. So how can we even come close to making decisions like that? We started out by talking about, well, okay, I was doing the talking, but we were all together, right? I was talking about the uncertainty in these kinds of situations. And how do you make these decisions with so much uncertainty? Well, the answer is, of course, to try to reduce the uncertainty. So now we're going to go back to a lot of these hand-drawn diagrams, because the way I think we should do this is to apply a lot more analytical models to our work. Structured analytical thinking, that's the thing. So there are a couple of really good books out there on intelligence analysis, but not that much on sort of how do you how do you apply those thoughts for our kind of work? So let's see how I am doing on time. Actually, not quite bad. That's good. Because now comes a lot of, I guess what was here now was sort of, that was, up until now, this, I guess, wasn't surprising. Like it was, yeah, I've read that before, I've thought that before. Yeah, of course it's like that. I hope we can continue like that, but what comes now is just imagination. This comes from my imagination. I have, to be quite honest, I have no idea if this is actually going to work because I'm still creating this, basically, and sort of this is a work in progress. We are going to implement this and try to do this where I work in Telenor CERT, but we haven't come that far yet. So you're basically, this is hot off the press. It's just, so if it's rubbish, you can blame me. If it's good, you can say, Telenor, that's a good place. So, first thing, this is the super simple stuff. Like, I mean, you need to make sure that when you respond to this, you figure out the dwell time. I'd say short dwell time, like also between intrusion and detection, that's like hours to days. Medium, let's say days to weeks, and long is months to years. And if you can catch something and you figure out fairly quickly that, yeah, I think we actually caught this pretty fast, yeah, go for it, Just go after them and try to clean up as fast as you can because they haven't been able to, infiltrate you properly yet. They haven't been able to damage you yet. So you might as well, try to kick them out and prevent them from gaining insight and foothold and providing or giving you, causing you damage. If it's days to weeks, yeah, well, then it depends a lot on your team, your response team, and the kind of capabilities that they have. If you're able to have a high operational tempo, you have a lot of data, a lot of telemetry, and you have good orchestration, you can probably catch up with these guys and maybe, go for a cleanup. But if you find something and they have been in there for years, and you hear these stories all the time. I have in my career heard of this or seen this many, many times, that when you start looking into an intrusion like this, it turns out that there are traces of the attacker for as far back as you're able to go in your log sources. They were in there in 2013 at least, because that's as far back as we have data. And then it's like, okay, no matter what you do, you're probably not going to be able to get them out because they by now probably know your infrastructure better than your IT operations. They're going to have every password from every system. They're just going to know you so well that even if you kick them out, they're going to have 17 ways back in. So then you may need to shut down, and you hear about this from time to time. You have to shut down the entire network and just reinstall everything, reset everything, or even worse, you hear this sometimes, to just build a new data center and migrate, right? Of course, it depends on the threat, but this is a function of the dwell time as well. So getting an idea of the dwell time is important. Then back to intrusion patterns. Based on what you're seeing, if you think you're more on the sting operation side of things, well then it's easier to clean up because the complexity of the infiltration is less, right? Or if you see traces of them being everywhere, it's like, okay, now I know now that this is going to be very hard. So if you have a long dwell time and you see indicators that this is like a really heavy, persistent infiltration, then okay, just by these two factors, that this is going to be super hard. At that point, you don't really have to rush, in my opinion. It's like, okay, these two things alone, and this you should actually be able to get an idea of just within hours and days of your investigation. If you say, okay, in this data source, we see them back 2-3 years. And yeah, we see them on like so many systems, it's not even funny. Already now, you know that you can take a step back and just like, okay, you know what? If I spend a month investigating this, it's going to make a difference. They've been there for so long. Even if we try to kick them out now, they're going to have so many ways back in. We might as well take our time. And this is how you can, just these two very simple concepts you can use to make decisions on how you want to respond. And even better, hopefully, you can use these concepts to get management approval for doing it. Because that is going to be the big issue, right? Yeah, we are totally compromised, and we don't want to do anything, because that's what it's going to sound like. Right? We don't want to do anything. What do you mean you don't want to do anything? No, okay, so I didn't really not do anything, but I mean, we're not going to kick them out. We're going to do a lot of stuff. We're going to analyze. We're going to try to figure out what's going on. But sort of having that conversation with upper management is super hard. But I think just these two simple concepts, these two simple models can actually help you start that conversation and maybe even getting it, okay, I understand. You explained it to me, so yeah, okay, I'll give you a month or 2 or 3. So, on to something a little bit more elaborate. Kind of random name. I like 3x3 matrices, so this was called the threat type matrix. And that is, you want to try to figure out what kind of threat actor you're up against. What kind of motivations they have for being in your infrastructure. This ties back to, for instance, the difference between being a direct target and being an indirect target. Like, are you attacked because you can provide access to the real target, or are you the real target? Like for the TAOs of the world attacking telcos like Telenor, we are an indirect target. But other times, when other threat actors attack, it's industrial espionage, and so we are the target, and that's sort of, so that is a different kind of threat type, sort of different threat profile. And I decided to divide this into strategic, tactical, and operational. And strategic, that means, now let's start at the bottom, actually. Operational means they are attacking you because of operational needs. And in the so it's so nice to be in Canada because I have so many examples to give. In the Snowden leaks, there is actually something about, sorry, CSE guys. There is actually something about how CSE is doing this. And at the time, which is probably many years ago, they had like a surge 2 times a year where they would just use SIGINT, find vulnerable, internet exposed services, and exploit them, and sort of pull them into what we in the old days called a botnet kind of thing, sort of, or not actually a botnet, just get access to it, right? Put web shells on it, I don't know, and create what they call in the sort of military speak orbs, operational relay boxes, and they would just sort of gather thousands and thousands of these. As a resource, just to use as proxy networks and C2 servers and whatever. So if you are compromised and you think that this is what's going on based on everything that you see around the compromise, you think that, okay, so I've actually just been attacked because they want to use my servers as their infrastructure. Well, then I'd say you're up against sort of an operational threat, or not an operational threat, but the threat actor's motive is operational. That means that if you just clean that up right now, there is no need to, there is no, and you patch your vulnerabilities, there is actually no reason to believe that that threat actor is going to come back in. Even though it's an APT, there is no motivation for them to try to be persistent on your web server. It was just an opportunistic target, right? So then there's the tactical motivation. That is more so a lot of espionage is done, corporate espionage is done because of contract negotiations and stuff like that. And one of the more interesting concrete examples I've talked to people about is someone who lost north of 120 million Canadian dollars in a contract negotiation because of an APT1 breach, where they would, steal everything regarding the contract negotiations, and when that company pieced together what had happened, and they made sort of estimated how much money they lost because of that. That was 120 million Canadian dollars. No, not million. Yeah, million. Yeah, 120,000 Canadian. No. I'm trying to do conversion in my head. I should have done this before. I should have had the number down here. Sorry. 800 million kroners, and it's 6.5, whatever. I'm sorry. A big number. That's the point. Yeah. Why did I even try to do this? I'm sorry. You know, I want to get it right. No one cares. So that's the kind of a tactical motivation where there is a specific objective and there is a time frame most of the time, and the attacker they infiltrate you to try to support some kind of tactical objective. And then it's a strategic one. And for instance, go back to the big intelligence services and telcos. They have a strategic motivation for attacking telcos like Telenor, because they want access, the access that we can provide them to metadata of phone calls and positioning. It's sort of a strategic resource, I guess, for them. So looking at an intrusion, you should try to figure out what kind of motivation is behind this. What kind of threat are you up against? Like, are they strategically motivated? Are they tactically motivated? Are they operationally motivated? As I said, if you think they're operationally motivated, just kick them out, and that should be it. If you think they're tactically motivated, well, now you know they're on the clock. Like I said, if it's a full, deep compromise that has lasted for years, there's no rush. Well, if you think that your attacker is tactically motivated, there is a rush because they are on the clock. So if you can slow them down, they might not be able to hurt you, right? While if their motivation is strategic, like for instance, the Chinese espionage on, well, the US and the rest of the world with the APT1 guys, that was more strategically motivated, right? Just get everyone's secrets and see if we can use them, sort of motivation. At least part of it was that, it seems. So if you're doing so I mean, like the defense industry, right? They're going to have a lot of strategically motivated attackers going at them because everyone wants to know the newest weapons technology, right? And then, of course, you should try to figure out how capable is this attacker? So low, medium, high. Yeah, basically the examples that I gave. So if you have a highly capable and strategically motivated adversary attacking you, or sorry, I shouldn't say adversary, intelligence capability infiltrating you, that really puts the P in APT. Those are going to be the guys who are going to be really, really persistent. While if you have someone that is in the sort of low capability spectrum and you think they're operationally motivated, there's not going to be a P in there at all, right? I mean, so the whole term APT doesn't really apply to this. I've just been using it because now everyone just uses APT as, espionage. But the P in APT belongs up in the upper right corner there. And sort of figuring this out, getting an idea of the attacker based on these just two simple axes is gonna inform your decision making in incident response, right? Because when I said you can take a step back, if you think they're strategically motivated and they're highly capable, there is nothing and they have been there for a long time, the dwell time, and they've gone for a sort of a deep, full infiltration. You don't need to hurry, because you're not going to be able to kick them out, and there is no rush. While if it's tactical, again, well, if it's a contract negotiation, you think fight them as hard as you can until the contract negotiations are done, and then they'll probably just leave. So, risk type matrix, next thing. So now it's time to turn the perspective from the attacker to to us as the target. So again, operational, tactical, strategic, but this time it means what kind of risk is this posing to us? Is it an operational risk? And by that I mean like having malware on your servers, is it going to make them unstable? Is it going to eat resources? Are your services going to go down because of this? Tactical, well, now it actually matches pretty well to the attacker, like contract negotiations. You know, is this project going to fail because of this? Are we going to? Is this procurement process going to be twice as expensive because of this? You know, that kind of thing. And strategic is more like, oh, did we lose all our R&D? Oh, wow, that wasn't good. And then just low, medium, and high, as in the risk. So we're not going to read all this. I basically just said this, but you can find this again in the slides when I put them online. The important thing here in this, in the diagram now is what's on the right side. Because on the operational risk, you're going to talk to IT operations because, I mean, that's where it is, right? I mean, this is all malware driven, and you know, it's access to your IT systems. So on operational risk, you're going to talk to IT. If it's a tactical business risk, well, you have to talk to business. You know, that's going to be a difficult conversation because they've never heard of APT before. And then if it's a strategic risk, well, you have to talk to upper management because those are the guys whose job it is, you know, to make the strategies and manage the risk to these strategies. And I'm going to assert that as a community, we are doing a lot of our work down there just, you know, on the operational side of things. Even if we know all this other stuff exists, we still mostly just talk to IT, right? I wish someone would, you know, get up and say, you know, seriously, no, we're doing all of this. But I can honestly say that even though I have created this slide deck, I haven't been doing this a lot. More aspiring to. Because as incident responders, most of us are technical. So we go and talk to IT and we talk technical. You need different kinds of skills, different kind of people to go and talk risk to business. And then if you're going to bridge the people who understand the technical side of the risk with the people who can sort of actually make sense of the business risks, there is a gap to be bridged. And I'm not sure a lot of CSIRTs around the world are set up to actually bridge that gap themselves, at least. So, next one. And this is actually the title of the talk. So sorry, Mike, what I did after I submitted this talk was that I just totally changed it into so in the original talk was going to be just about this. But the more I worked on it, the more I realized, no, I need more models. This is just one out of several that we need, you know, to do what I want to achieve with this model. So this is the FATPI, or CTIM, or whatever, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Matrix, which is a name that doesn't really mean anything. But as you can see, FATPI is the first letters of the 2-axis. And how many of you have heard about Ryan Stillion's detection maturity level? Too tired after all the curry, or you haven't heard about it? I'm not sure. Okay, then I need to sort of ask one more question to figure out whether or not you're just sleeping, or if you haven't heard about it. How many of you work with incident response? That was the usual 5 hands. Okay, I should have asked that before I started and told you all this is only for incident response. This entire talk is for incident response. Anyway, detection maturity level, that is basically, you know what? If you're interested, the slides are going to come online, and then you can find the link to the presentation called, the presentation there, and it's going to have links to the detection maturity levels. But basically, this is depth of knowledge. When you're analyzing a threat, to what depth of knowledge can you how far can you go? Like footprint, that is the easy stuff. That's IP, hashes, domain names, whatever, you know, like concrete stuff that you can, sometimes, what I guess you in threat intel sharing platforms would call observables. Arsenal, that's more like, okay, so you found a specific plugx sample, so you know that they're using plugx. So using plugx as part of their arsenal, and maybe you can even say, yeah, they're using the early 2016 builder of this strain of plugx. And then tradecraft, that is, well, I guess that is what makes most immediate sense here. That's their processes, their routines and stuff. How did their training? How do they work? How do they think? How do they structure their work? And then the other axis is stages of attack. So that is sort of so loosely based on the cyber kill chain, but that paper, by the way, is so awesome. And the way that Lockheed Martin used and I guess still uses the kill chain concept is awesome. But now everyone seems to think that every attack in the world goes according to the cyber kill chain, which it doesn't, because that is a very malware-oriented, you know, penetrating your system with malware kind of attack. So I've simplified it and just tried to make it more generic and say that if someone is going to attack you, first they're going to prepare for it. Then there's going to be an intrusion phase. And I don't here just mean exploitation, you know, getting code running on your system. I mean the whole access layer that we talked about earlier, right? Building that whole access into your network. And then the execution stage, which is sort of, okay, using that access to delivering on their mission and their objectives. So, what are we going to use this for? Okay, so I just told you this. Let's skip beyond that. One more. Yeah. So the purpose of this is to help you identify knowledge gaps. Because if you have knowledge gaps, that means there's going to be uncertainty. And we started out by, you know, saying we need to reduce uncertainty if we want to make better decisions as incident response. So this is specifically put together to help you reduce uncertainty by identifying knowledge gaps. So how? Okay. If you read about what not to do and do during public speaking, one of the things that's on top of the not to-do list is apologize. Do not apologize. Just whatever it is, just go. But I feel I have to apologize for this. This is a bit too crowded for you guys to make any sense of, unless you have like 15 minutes later today after this is put online. But I'm going to try to work you through it, so don't try to read everything. So if you observe that you have a hacked web server and someone placed a CKnife web shell there, well, that is, I'm at the upper right corner there, by the way, for those of you who want to sort of see where I'm talking. That is an observation that you would put into, you know, footprint in the intrusion phase. And if someone sends you a phishing email to a specific user from a specific IP, that is also, you know, footprint in the intrusion phase, and so forth. To pick some of the other cells here, like use Mimikatz to harvest credentials from memory. Well, that is an arsenal thing in the execution phase. Okay, maybe it should actually, based on what I just said, maybe that should actually have been intrusion phase, because that is basically an access thing. Tradecraft uses ping-n1 an IP to check if a host is up, and then before authing to the IPC share, right? That is a tradecraft thingy for the execution phase. Point is, if you take all your findings and you map them according to this, it will become immediate to you very quickly if it turns out that you have zero clue what is going on in the preparation phase. Like, that would mean, for instance, so in the footprint for preparation, upper left corner is like register evil.com with enum. Like, some of the APT1 guys, they just loved enum. They like every domain they registered was at enum, right? if you know nothing about how they prepare their attacks against you, you know you have knowledge gaps. Knowledge gaps that might be critical, because when we're talking about preventing re-entry, knowing how they set up their infrastructure for the next wave is actually very important. And if you, when you map all you know, you see, I have nothing in the yellow column. You can sit down with your managers and say, you know what? We have big knowledge gaps. There's too much uncertainty here for us to actually kick these guys out now, unless it's really urgent that we do. So, and you can also, so this, the big bubble there, that is one of the observations from the last slide. You can also use this to take your observations and just, okay, so this is what we observed. Use plugx on host Z to query database server Y for data type A. So, okay, plugx, which builder, which strain, which group uses this? You can spawn a lot of other questions. Host Z, okay, how did they get onto that system? Why did they go to that system? DB server Y, where did they get the creds? Can you use these credentials on other servers? Have they used these credentials on these servers? For every finding that you have, you can create a whole list of new questions that you possibly could answer, and these will again, map into different parts of the matrix, and some of it will not even map into this, but it may map into some of the other models. The point is, you can use this to figure out if there is a lot of stuff that you really should know before you try to kick these guys out. And that is the whole purpose of this. It says in the yellow box at the bottom there. The fat pie is its purpose is to sort of be a too soon canary for your response. If you figure out you have too many knowledge gaps, you probably shouldn't try to act until you have filled those knowledge gaps. And this is equally important, if you figure out you have a lot of knowledge gaps that you're unable to close, you need to figure out why. Maybe you actually have to rebuild some of your infrastructure before you act. Because before you do that, you don't really have a defendable infrastructure. So if you kick them out, you're just going to come straight back in. This is just all of them combined. The FATPI, the CTIM, that addresses your uncertainty. The risk type matrix, that sort of says something about the urgency. Do we have to act now, or can we wait a bit? And so this is sort of, this is going to be, you're going to get, maybe the urgency says, oh, we actually do need to act now. And then the FATPI is going to say, we cannot really do now. But what you can get if you try to organize your thinking this way, you cannot use this directly. This is just, concepts to use when organizing your analysis. But if you do this, you can actually start, saying, this suggests that we should wait. This suggests that we should act now. This suggests it's going to be super complicated. So you can sort of piece together an argument and be able to present it to people and say, this is what I think we should do. This is why I think we should do it this way. And I hear you want to do it like this, but based on what I presented to you here, if we do that, that is going to hurt us here. So you can get a lot more granular discussion around the decision on what to do. And that is the whole point of all these models. So I think I have like 4 minutes left. Is that true? Yeah. So good thing I only have 4 slides left or something like that. So we're going to go to response patterns, because now we've been talking about the APT patterns, talking about analytical methods, and now, okay, I'm talking about incident response. Let's talk about some incident response patterns. And this is sort of a sarcastic slide. I'd say that a very normal response pattern is just ignorance, so you can't really call it a response pattern, but you just ignore the problem completely. Sony is, I don't know if they're ignorance or denial, but like, no, it's okay. We know, but we accept this risk, and yeah, well, turned out that CISO was wrong. Then you have denial. Someone tell you about the problem, and you just go, no, I don't. I've literally had someone tell me that their CTO quote unquote, didn't believe in APT. So it was a question of faith, apparently, and not fact. Then is what I like to call the whack-a-mole response pattern, and that is like alert, re-image, you know? You just, and then it's the clean, purge, and score, which basically is, you know, scope and identify and clean up. That's the clean. Purge is the, okay, close down the network, re-image everything, reset every password. And scorched earth is, you know, build a new data center and migrate. And in the middle there is engage. And that means playing chess with the attackers. That means you don't just scope, sit back and do nothing, scope and then clean, but you start, you know, you start poking them a bit. You know, I'm gonna close up this access. I'm gonna make it look like this was just totally random that we did this, but actually we did it to keep you away from data source X. And the reason this is an arc, the response arc, is that on the left side, you know, very little effect. The stuff that you do there has very little effect. On the right side, you don't really want to do that either. I mean, you do not want to build a new data center and migrate. That is insanely costly, right? And I believe that in the middle there, you strike a good balance between being effective and being cost effective. The problem is that the engage response pattern requires a really excellent response team. If you want to do that, if you want to have it effective, but you don't want to build new data centers from now, you know, every now and then, you need to have really, really good people in your response team, like highly specialized team of experts, basically, which cost a lot, which is going to, you know, make a lot of companies go, no, we can't do that. But I think that strikes a good balance. And now it's for the wrap up. So why did I call this the red pill of attacker eviction? Well, based on these models that I presented, I'm gonna say that responding to these kinds of things is actually a lot more complex than most responders really realize and appreciate. And you're up against something, I chose the word malevolent because, I mean, it's easy to think, nah, you know, viruses and computers, yeah, I know the whole adversary thing, but, you know, we'll clean it up. But on the business side of things, it's actually someone coming at you, you know, with a knife. You know, they don't play fair, you know. They're going to break every rule in the book to win the competition against you. It's like in a soccer field, it's like, you know, hurting someone's knee deliberately to have them off the field, right? Is that kind of thing going on. And that is the red pill here, to sort of realize how complex it is and how bad it really is. But the key takeaway from the whole thing is that if you really work at understanding what is going on, to, you know, for instance, using these models, there is a lot we can do to improve how we do this. Then you can actually choose the right response pattern to the identified intrusion patterns and the threat and risk types, and hopefully land on a better response plan than you would if you didn't. And I'm going to end this talk now with sort of my favorite, well, actually it is a Prodigy album, but it's sort of a motto, because everyone is going like, oh, the attackers have all the advantages. And I'm like, nope. If you use your home field advantage, you are at a very good place at fighting back. So even though you are always outnumbered, you should never be outgunned. And this stack of models is just one more gun, you know, in your stack to be able to fight back. And I hope at least some of you will be able to use this for the good fight. And now I'm going to end and not give Mike a heart attack. So thank you for your attention. And yeah, thank you.